It's the first off-season book club here at Locked On Pacers discussing Chris Herring's Blood in the Garden about the 90s New York Knicks who intersected with the Pacers quite often. I learned a lot about the NBA and the Pacers, and we'll talk about a lot of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI. And today, history show number 3 of August, as we do in one of the slower months of the NBA calendar. We're going even farther back in time. We're continuing to go farther back in time. Last week, Brendan Rourke and I went back 3 years to talk about TJ Warren's bubble explosion on the anniversary of his 50-point game. Earlier this week, Tom Lewis and I went back 10 years to the Heat Pacers Eastern Conference Finals. And today, we're going back to the 90s to talk about the Knicks Pacers rivalry and intersection to the extent that it was chronicled by Chris Herring in Blood in the Garden. And I learned a ton from this, and we're doing a lot of this via the discussion of his book, Blood in the Garden, like I just said. I just finished it tonight. I am a slow reader. It's 2 a.m. I thought I could get it done way faster than this, and a procrastinator. So hopefully I don't trip over into my words. Great read. I highly recommend you read it. It's all about the 1990s New York Knicks, the Pat Riley era, the JVG era, and everything about Ewig and those teams as they grew from not a powerhouse team to a team that made the finals as an 8 seed. Lots of intersection with the Pacers, of course, that we'll be talking about today. But there's so much in this book that I learned that I encourage anyone to read. And I especially encourage you to read it if you're closer to my age, right? I was born in 1995 to date myself to some listeners. Like, I didn't know half this stuff about the 90s NBA or some of these earlier Pacers-Knicks series. In fact, I didn't realize how much of the Ewig theory was based on Pacers-Knicks series. And that wasn't even referenced in the book, but I connected some of the dots there. Fascinating stuff. And just to me, that was one of the things that stood out reading this, is just how much the NBA has changed, right? This is 25 to 30 years ago, a lot of the stories in this, but there's a great story in there that Herring dug up about Anthony Mason, and he got suspended for a game by the Knicks, and he showed up anyway and sat in the crowd with fans. Like, that would never happen today. There's absolutely no way. It was nuts. It's crazy. I also learned things like Patrick Ewig wanted to leave the Knicks at one point in 1991 and had a list of 6 teams he wanted to go to. And I would like to toss that at older people who say, I hate the NBA now, and all these guys demanding trades to specific spots and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's been happening for forever and ever. Obviously, it's way different now and ramped up to a much higher level. And I'm obviously making fun of a fake person, but I did not realize that it even ever happened. I thought that was completely fascinating. And this was an interesting part of it. He actually could have left the Knicks if his salary wasn't amongst the 4 highest in the league, and it was his base salary, not based on bonuses. I'm talking about a lot of non-Pacer stuff here, but this is just to kind of talk about how much the league has changed, and some other great stories in there about lawyers trying to get playoff suspensions revoked, and JFK Jr. getting season tickets, but they were in the 300 level of MSG. It was hysterical. That story was, and a lot of good stuff in there. But of course, this is a Pacers podcast, and it's 4 minutes in talking about the Pacers parts of this, because obviously the 1990s Knicks deserve a whole book. I mean, there were so many good anecdotes. I just rattled off a few of them in just a couple minutes. But these teams played a ton in the playoffs. 5 postseason battles just in the 90s, right? Just in that decade. And again in 2000, the year the Pacers made the finals. That obviously not in this book because it wasn't in the 1990s, but there's just so much intersection between these teams. And of course, famous moments with the Reggie Spike Lee stuff and the 8 points, 9 seconds and stuff I didn't even know about. And that's what I wanted to talk about here because, I knew a lot of this stuff, like very, very big picture, like it's been explained to me, or like I've read a headline, or like I can read Basketball Reference, but like seeing all the details really changes the perspective of a lot of this stuff. The first place to start, I suppose, is 1993. The Pacers made the playoffs. They lost in the first round to the Knicks that year. And the Pacers at this time, like, to contextualize this, because I don't think like this, right? Because I wasn't born yet, but the Pacers had not won a playoff series in the NBA, right, in 1993. They did not until 1994, but they played the Knicks in the first round that year. And ironically, that series, the Knicks beat the Pacers 3-1, prompted Donnie Walsh, the then Pacers man in charge, president, GM, whatever. That series kind of prompted him to go out and get tougher, right? 1992, there was this play that Charles Oakley completely leveled Reggie Miller with a hard hit in the middle of a game. It was such a hard hit that, according to Herring in the book, no foul was even called. Like, everybody was so dumbfounded by the strength of this hit that they didn't even call a foul in the moment. And so that kind of inspired Donnie to go, you know what, we need to get tougher if we want to compete with these teams, compete with the era. And this is around Jordan's ascent, but the Detroit Bad Boys were a thing around then. And soon to be the Miami Heat tough guys were coming up. So the Pacers had to get tougher, right? They had yet to win a series. And so in 1993, they'd made a lot of changes, right? They switched coaches from Bob Hill to Larry Brown. That was obviously significant for the Pacers. But they also acquired Haywood Workman, Derek McKee, and Antonio Daniels all in one summer, along with Larry Brown, right? So it's funny to think about the Pacers formation of this team that became not the bane of the Knicks' existence. That was obviously MJ himself, but such a pain in their side was kind of formed because of their identity, right? These Knicks teams were so tough. They're going to hit you. They're going to play through Ewing. They're just tough. And the Pacers were like, yeah, we need to be more like that. We need to be less of our offensively focused group, right? In 1992-93, the Pacers were 21st in defense and 5th in offense, right? And they were a good team. They made the postseason, but that they wanted to be more like the Knicks. And then the following season, because of those things Donnie Walsh did, they were 11th in offense, so a slight drop from 5th to 11th, but they climbed from 21st to 8th in defense, which was huge, and that jumped them up to instead a 47-win team that was very capable of doing much more in the postseason. And of course, again, they hadn't won a playoff series yet, so becoming that quality of team was really significant. So then you get into 1994, and I didn't realize, I knew the Pacers improved as like Reggie got better and they added some talent, but I didn't realize how much of their improvements in the early to mid 90s were because of that style change, right? I thought it was more about, just the players getting better and adding actual talent to those teams, right? 1994, Reggie Miller's entering like his 6th season. Sam Mitchell's entering his 4th season. Rick Smits is entering his 5th season. Like, they're just getting better, right? That all makes sense to me. Dale Davis entering his 2nd season. All this stuff made sense, but it was a lot more than just that, which I thought was interesting. In 1994, of course, a ton of cool stories and anecdotes from this book. And honestly, I have a note here, by the way, that I want to bring up. And then I guess we'll go to the second segment to keep going. I have notes from 94, 95, 98, and 99 I want to get to from this book. Chris Herring just absolutely crushed this. He is still killing it for Sports Illustrated these days. Anyway, a message to the current Pacers, maybe, right? About a little bit of a style change from like this offensive run and gun style to adding just a teeny touch of defensive toughness, how much that has changed teams, right? And Tom and I just talked about this with the conference finals team for 2013. David West being that kind of dude was significant for them as well. This is just coincidences. This is not something the Pacers necessarily need to do, but I have thought it's funny how often that has popped up when looking back through history of some of the Pacers' successful seasons, especially this 1994 one, which was the first year the Pacers won a playoff series in the NBA. Again, I knew that. I had seen that before. I flipped through the Pacers historical index several times, but just like reading it and like knowing when I was born, it's just like, oh, they were not, this consistent, successful team like that I, thought of them as growing up. I didn't grow up all in Indiana, but that just changed my perspective quite a bit. Anyway, lots of cool notes about 1994, 95, and 96. Spike Lee was the 1994 series with the infamous choke sign from Reggie Miller. We'll talk about that and more in segment 2 of today's show. Before we talk about all that, though, I need to really quickly talk to you guys about the great people over at Birddogs, because I just re-upped with them. Got another pair of shorts and my first pair of pants from them. So I have 3 pairs of shorts and a pair of pants. And hey, I got a hat with my order. I have tumbler from Birddogs. I have a lot of stuff from them. Anyway, what is Birddogs? Well, they sell shorts and pants, and they are fantastic. They make you look good. They have this stretch khaki shorts that are designed to kind of like fit slimmer through your thigh, and they have like netting in them, so you can wear them with lots of other stuff, and you look really good in them. Like, they fit me really well. They do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit a lot better, and they fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff restricting cotton. They fixed that issue by having their cloud knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but it stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice your movement. And they use their anti-stink sweat wicking fabric, so you can be cool and dry all day long. I've said this on this before, but I wore them for a whole day in New York City, so 20,000 steps, no sweat. It was great. You have got to try them yourself. And now you can get a free hat with your order. You've got to do it. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat. I tweeted a picture of mine at LockedOnPacers account on Twitter if you want to see it. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We can promise you that. Try them out today. Birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, this is easy just because of the topic of today's show. Go to Locked On Knicks. Hear what's going on in the land of New York. Today, we are talking about Blood in the Garden, a book about the Knicks in the 1990s, which just so happens to have a ton of Pacers references because of how much those teams intersected in that decade. It's almost like a LeBron book with Cavs Pacers references, excuse me. Speaking of, this is the first book club. We're going to do another one for sure. Mark Monteith's The Reborn. That one's just about the Pacers. It's hard because I don't want to like just do a book review or like reveal so many topics that you guys don't read the book. I highly recommend you read this one. That one's just about the Pacers. So I don't know if I'll do a whole show or just segments on that. We'll see how that shakes out. And if I get enough interest, I'll do another one. I have 2 other basketball books, but they're probably not as Pacers-y. Either way, we will continue via Blood in the Garden today, looking more at 1994. And there's this great note in there about the Reggie Miller-Spike Lee relationship as they headed into that 1994 playoff series. I didn't know this before this conference finals. They had a bet, and that was if the Knicks won the series, Reggie Miller had to go visit Mike Tyson, who was incarcerated in Indianapolis prison. He had to go visit him in jail. Had the Pacers won the series, Reggie Miller's wife would have gotten a role in a Spike Lee movie. Very significant for her, potentially in an acting career. Never even knew any of that. Thought that was fascinating. That, of course, was a series that went to 7. Game one being the one with the infamous choking symbol from Reggie happening. It is just fascinating to read about the juxtaposition between those 1994 teams at the time, right? That was, again, the first year of the Pacers winning a series in the playoffs. They get all the way to the conference finals. The Knicks are this emerging powerhouse. They're in a huge market. Michael Jordan is gone, right? They have all this hope of winning something that year, right? They made the finals, right? Of course, they had the chance to actually do it. But the Pacers hadn't won a series ever. They're in this tiny market, right? Just totally different situations those teams were in. Like, that made that series very gripping to a lot of people. Funnily enough, parallels to the 2000 NBA Finals with the Knicks playing the Spurs that year. 1999. The Spurs that year, with the Spurs on their ascent with Tim Duncan, and that team being a very small market, and they just thumped the Knicks in the finals that year. The Knicks went on to lose that finals to the Houston Rockets in 7 games, but a great series with the Pacers obviously going to 7, and a sign of many things to come for the 2 franchises in the decade, because they would go on to meet a whopping 1 year later in the postseason, 1995. This year, hey, Tony East is alive and existing for this playoffs. I obviously don't remember any of it, but this is the year that 8.9 seconds happened. This was a second-round series between the 2 teams. Pacers beat the Hawks handily in the first round that year. Shaq and Penny are kind of rising. Interesting time in the Eastern Conference at this time. And I did not know this. So this is the stuff I love about this. Like, I would just never have known this. So during the game, the 8.9 seconds game, it was game 1 in MSG. I obviously knew that part. But Donnie Walsh, who we talked about earlier, left the court. He left his seat because he thought it was over, because they were down 6 with under 20 seconds to go. And he went into the locker room to smoke a cigarette. And then Reggie hits the 3. And then Reggie hits the other 3. And Mel Daniels runs in there during the free throws the Knicks are taking, though, when they miss both, and says, it's tied. He couldn't believe it. And he runs off. And of course, that was significant. Pacers end up winning that game. And that series had a lot of, big moments, of course, with Ewig missing the finger roll to tie it at the end. I like knew Pat Riley wasn't with the Knicks for that long, but I didn't realize that like right after the series, he lingered on the court, Herring writes about, and kind of surveyed the scene and really soaked it all in because he knew that was the end of his time. He left the Knicks that summer to go to the Miami Heat, and that obviously has changed the Heat franchise forever and ever. But I didn't realize how that timing all worked out and what that kind of meant for the Knicks franchise, who then pivoted to Don Nelson and it didn't work out, and then again to Jeff Van Gundy. And I'm talking too much about the Knicks. This is a Pacers podcast, but this was a book I just read about the New York Knicks. But I didn't realize one that Donnie Walsh literally walked off the floor because he didn't think they were going to win, and that series was really the one that shifted the fate of Pat Riley. So the Knicks, not a down stretch. That sounds ridiculous, but the Knicks did not have like the most amazing stretch the next year. They switch coaches to JVG. They get smoked by MJ, and then they lose to Pat Riley in the second round in 97, and back to 98. Finally, we get Pacers-Knicks again. More details, more juicy stories, more stuff to learn. And some people who have covered the Pacers for forever and ever, who are older or who know the history of this franchise way better than I do, say that 1998 was the best Pacers team ever, right? 2000 team made the finals, but some people have said to me, or at least have described in public spaces, that they think this 1998 team was the best Pacers team ever, right? I think that's very fascinating to hear. Better than 2004, which, at least in my form of time where I can actually like remember watching basketball, is the best Pacers team I can remember. Obviously, that team did not have their chance to be the best Pacers team ever, but a lot of people say it's 1998, and by a lot, I mean a few people that I have talked to. I don't know how you feel as a listener. They went 58-24 that year. They smoked the Cavs in the first round, right? They were really good. They finished fifth in net rating. Reggie was good. Jalen Rose was now on the team, right? Mark Jackson was now on the team, right? They were becoming a good team. Travis Best had a nice role. Chris Mullin was added, right? They were good. And they were playing the Knicks again, except this time the Pacers were finally seen as this formidable threat for a lot of the reasons that I kind of just described. And that team took the Bulls to 7 in the conference final. So I just spoiled that they beat the Knicks, but I didn't realize, again, stuff I should know. I knew about Ewing injuries against the Pacers, which I just spoiled part of the 1999 Pacers-Knicks series. I didn't know that in 1998, Patrick Ewing had broken his wrist, and the surgery was so bad that his mobility was like different and limited, and he didn't play in game 1 and then joined the series for game 2 and played very poorly, shot 35% from the field, as the Knicks were just not good enough. They lost it in 5 they were overmatched, especially without their star. And so I didn't realize that he got hurt that year in that postseason. Like when I always saw it with 4-1 Pacers, I was like, oh, they just beat the doors off a team they're better than. I didn't realize how much was involved there because the Knicks only went 43-39 that year. Obviously, the injury for Ewing was a part of it, but they barely got by the Heat in the first round, which is still significant to beat Pat Riley. But they were just a different kind of team, and they were really aging out at the time. And this is well chronicled by Herring. But I thought that was really interesting that my brain never knew that he returned from injury that series, but that didn't play very well. And that also came to be part of the 1999 part of this as well. The final series written about in the book. But there was actually another part of 1999 that I jotted in my notes that I wanted to talk about here. So this was a lockout year. 1999 was. They only played 50 games. The Knicks only played 49. The Pacers played 50 this year. And so, I just did stupid math. The Knicks also played 50. Anyway, they only played 50 games this season. Knicks were the 8 seed, obviously a very famous team. They made the finals as an 8 seed. They beat the Pacers this year in the conference finals. I keep getting ahead of myself. But before the season, the Knicks are making some changes, right, to their team. They get Marcus Camby, they get Latrell Sprewell, among some other moves that they make. And they're trying. Jeff Van Gundy's trying to like motivate his team to come practice and be together when they can. And to do so, he used the Pacers, who just beat them in the 1998 playoffs, as an example. He said, hey, look, the Pacers are together. They're practicing. They're doing all this stuff. And so he put that all out in the media to like fake rally cry his team. It wasn't like the real reasoning. It was like fake praise to try to rally cry and bond his group. Didn't really work, but it didn't matter. The Knicks, they were kind of limping around that year, but they had just enough to be good and interesting. And, they fired their GM that year, and that kind of ignited the team. But then this is where the Ewing theory part of this comes in. Like, I thought his injury history against the Pacers was this part. Doesn't fully tear, but he partially tears his Achilles versus the Pacers in the playoffs that year. Like, I knew it was 1v8, and I knew he got hurt in some way, but I didn't realize, A, how significant it was, B, how early in the series it was, and C, that the Ewing theory was partially from that. And the Knicks steamrolled the Pacers for a lot of that series. They ended up winning in 6. Very impressive for them to be able to pull that off without their guy. And that's, again, where this theory comes from. But a lot of those acquisitions, I said, like Marcus Camby, who they got in a very significant trade with the Raptors, and Latrell Sprewell, who had, some off-court stuff going on. It was a big risk to get him, were huge. They were very significant in that series. Allen Houston played really well in the closeout game. Like, they were a good team, but to take down the Pacers in that way was really interesting. Also, a big part of this, the Larry Johnson 4-point play. Some Pacers fans, one of their least favorite plays ever. So, looking back on it, like, I've seen that shot before. I've seen the foul call, blah, blah, blah. It's 24 years ago. What doesn't matter is the results of the play. What does matter is, I did not know this, the official who called the foul and ruled that it was a shooting foul admitted, only 1 year later, by the way, admitted in 2000 that either it should have been no foul on the shot and just a 3, which would have tied the game, or it should have been a foul before the shot, which would have been 2 free throws. So I can't remember the ref's name. I should have wrote it down. But admitted that he got it wrong, and he kept a photo of the play as like a reminder of, like, I messed this up. So I thought that was really interesting. I did not know that. Even though it's like, if you watch the replay, it's obvious immediately that the foul's way before the shot, and it shouldn't be a 4-point play. Drills the free throw. Huge moment in that series. Pacers had won 10 home playoff games in a row before that series, and the very impressive win by the 8-seeded New York Knicks, who got, again, smoked by the Spurs, as I mentioned and referred to earlier in the show. So I just learned a lot of stuff from this. The 2000 series that the Pacers won to make it to their first finals was not a part of this, because that was not the 1990s Knicks, which is, of course, what this book is about. But I would love to know more on that, just because I liked learning all this stuff. It was completely and totally fascinating to see it all kind of written down, and I learned a lot from this. And right after that, right, 2000, Knicks beat the Pacers. 1999, Knicks beat the Pacers. 2000, Pacers beat the Knicks in the conference finals, and the Knicks were never the same. The next year, they lost in the first round of the Raptors, and then out of the playoffs the next year, out of the playoffs the following year, and changing coaches, right? That was a significant down right after the 90s for them. So my key takeaway, fantastic read. Fantastic. I skipped over so many cool stories I would recommend you learning from. Blood in the Garden by Chris Herring. This is the cover if you're watching on YouTube and you want to get it. I recommend it. It was a fantastic read. We'll do another book club this month, and I will hopefully get to it a little earlier than finishing at 2 in the morning. Anyway, one more thing I want to talk about today. We got to do a third segment. I'm dumb, and I should have done a different segment here, but ESPN did power rankings for NBA teams after the offseason moves. Pacers ranked 21st. Is that too low? We'll quickly talk about that to close out today's show. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, 2 recommendations for me. I've been listening to these today. Hall of Fame enshrinement is this weekend. Dirk Nowitzki and Dwayne Wade, 2 legends of the game. Locked On Mavs has done a show on Dirk, and Locked On Heat's had a full week on D Wade. Really good stories. Antoine Walker, he's on his Haslam on their show. Really good stuff. I recommend listening to both of those shows, and I believe our Mavs guys will be at the Hall of Fame ceremony. I think one of our Heat guys will be there too. So they'll have a lot of good stuff. Check out those shows to close out today's show. Speaking of stuff and our guys being there, me was at Miles Turner's basketball camp earlier today. So if you want to hear more from Miles Turner about the Pacers off season, him having his first camp in Indy, all sorts of other stuff, the Locked On Pacers YouTube channel has that video uploaded, and I have one of my 2 stories from that up on Pacers SI. Let's close out today's show with one more newsy item I wanted to get to today. And you just heard me call myself an idiot, because if I was smart, I would have saved the Obi Toppin stuff I talked about yesterday for today. Why? Because that's Pacers-Knicksy enough. And then the show would have been thematically all about the Pacers and Knicks via Obi Toppin. And I would have done this news item yesterday. But anyway, I have a lot of news items baked up for next week. Some schedule-related stuff. Some stuff about Bruce Brown. I wrote a really long story about him. More international play. Chad Buchanan talking. I did a story about Gennaro Pargo. And, of course, what Miles Turner said at his camp. But one thing I want to do today, that is not necessarily news, but just something I wanted to discuss and get a feel for how fans feel about this. ESPN did a power ranking of all the NBA teams based on the moves made this summer. So, hey, Obi Toppin was a part of these moves. This is how I'll make this Knicks Pacers-y. Anyway, the Pacers are ranked 21st. And at first I was like, that seems too low to me. You know, I already have done a show ranking them in my own head, 8th in the East. There's no way there's, what would that be? 13 West teams better than them, right? And then I read through the list, right? Bear with me. Denver, Milwaukee, Boston, Phoenix, Miami, Philly, LA Lakers, Golden State, Cleveland, Memphis, LA Clippers, Kings, Knicks, Mavs, Thunder, Timberwolves, Pelicans, Hawks, Nets, Jazz were the top 20. And so through about the Mavs, I was like, yep, this all makes sense to me. And the Thunder could be pretty good. They won 40 games last year and they're young. The Timberwolves should be better. They've got Anthony Edwards on their team. The Pelicans could be amazing. They were the number 1 seed until Zion got hurt. Like, those teams have some downside that the Pacers could catch, but I get why they're ahead of them. The Hawks, I talked about with Matt Moore. I think they're probably going to have a better record than the Pacers this year. And then I just get totally lost. The Nets and the Jazz really threw me for a loop in this exercise. And the Nets particularly threw me off because in my head, I thought, well, how are the Pacers 9th in the East? Like, so that is where the ranking for the Pacers is. Now they're ahead of the Bulls, which I thought was interesting here. So the discussion to me is that too low? Is 21 too low for this Pacers team? And I wrote up an article about this, kind of talking about just where they had them and what it kind of suggests about what people think of the Pacers offseason. And people replied and were like, what? That's way too low. Like, to me, the Nets got worse. And that's not just because they're worse. It's because of the moves they made at the trade deadline. And the Pacers got better. They got Bruce Brown. They got Obi Toppin, right? They are, to me, I said this already on the show I did with Matt Moore, looking at where the Pacers are in the East. They're better than the Nets to me. They are just better. The Jazz one kind of blew my mind. Yes, the Pacers were only 2 wins below. They were 2 wins below the Jazz last season. But the Jazz did not make a lot of improving moves this summer. In fact, they have 3 first-round picks on their team, right? And 2 of them are probably going to play in Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks, right? How are they going to be playing all those guys? They got John Collins, sure. But, like, how are they going to be playing, first of all their front court guys, but 2, a lot of young guys, and expecting to take a big step forward? Like, I get that Markkanen's awesome and Sexton could be better, and, like, they have good stuff on their team. They're a good team. But how are they going to be significantly better? To me, the Pacers are going to catch them. The Pacers, again, were 26 and 22 when Miles Turner and Tyrese Halliburton play. If those 2 guys play 55 to 60 overlapping games, you're already talking about like a floor of 32 wins. And then the other 22 games, just getting 8, 9, like that seems doable to me. So that is kind of why I was surprised by this ranking and wanted to discuss it, because I couldn't believe the Jazz were above the Pacers. The Nets, I guess I get it. Like, Mikal Bridges is good. Cam Johnson's good. Spencer Dinwiddie's a fine point guard. Like, they have good players on their team. Nick Claxton's awesome. He would help every team in the league. But I was very surprised to see the Pacers ranked 21st until I really kind of chopped through it and went, okay, the top 18 all makes sense to me. Like, if you made me intuitively just say, rank the teams by what you think their win total will be this year, I would probably have the Pacers about 19th after listing it all out. So 21st seemed really surprising to me, especially given the 2 teams right in front of them. But then I really thought about it, and I thought, that actually kind of seems about right. And I just wanted to talk about that because the landscape of the NBA is shifting a lot this summer. The Pacers got better. They want to make the playoffs next year. But seeing 21st sounds so much worse than like 19th and pushing for the playoffs, if that makes any sense. So I thought it was really interesting to just kind of see where they were ranked and see the teams around them. They're ahead of the Bulls, which I think is interesting. The more I've thought about the Bulls recently, the more I think they could be okay and harder to hold off for the Pacers. But, like, why did they get dinged so much and the Jazz and Nets got propped up? I don't know. It was an interesting exercise to talk about and kind of think through. I think if I had to power rank the Pacers based on their offseason moves, it'd be in the 18-19 range. To me, right now, with a little more upward mobility than downward, just given the age of the players on their team. But I suppose why they could be placed here, although I obviously have said, I think right now I'd put them 8th in the East. This has them 9th. And I think that they can certainly be better than the Utah Jazz this season. And it's like fair to say they'll be better than one of OKC, Minnesota, New Orleans. That's maybe not feasible. Like, those teams were basically 500 teams last year. And the Pacers getting to 500 would be a solid season to me. But it's plausible that, like, they have good enough chances at catching any one of them that saying, will they catch any of the 3 is not a surprising statement. Anyway, I just want to talk about that a little bit because I was a little surprised when I saw the number, but less surprised when I really talked it out. And I wanted to get it into the show at some point. Should have done this yesterday and on Obi Toppin today for Knicks theme. But hey, you live and you learn. Next week here on Locked On Pacers, I want to do a show over-unders, looking ahead at some of the lines for the Pacers this year, including win totals, various player props, and lines, just to dive into it and kind of set the scene for the season, what we expect guys to be better or worse at given the new state of the roster. I'll talk more about international Pacers play and the rest of the news items that I have banked up that we've been neglecting since we haven't done any news shows until since late July. I'm going to try to get another player on next week, although it sounds like scheduling-wise it'll be a little farther away than that. And then maybe one more thing. We'll see. There's going to be 4 episodes, just the content of them we will see. Perhaps the next book club could be next week, depending on what happens. So lots of fun stuff coming. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. I learned a lot. And again, I would encourage you to read Chris Herring's Blood in the Garden. Pick it up online, on Amazon, in a bookstore, wherever you purchase your books. Thank you guys a ton for listening to today's show. Back on Monday, talking more Pacers. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful weekend.